Hello, I'm Steph from iDriver Classic, and today I'm looking at something that's decidedly more modern than some of the classics we've been looking at lately. It's the Phase 1 or first generation or Mark 1 as it's sometimes known, Renault Twingo. This particular example is from 1993 and it's quite a rare find to see it in the UK because these were never sold here. Well, apart from a few dealerships, but we'll talk about that later on. Now this is a car that influenced other cars that you've seen on the roads of Great Britain. It offered motoring to millions. They sold over 2 million of these cars across the world. So for me, whilst this may not have chrome and all the various bits and pieces of heritage that some of the older cars that we test have, I think that we can definitely pop it in that box that's sometimes marked young timer or emerging classic. I'm going to walk you through this car today, tell you some interesting bits and pieces, and if nothing else, celebrate a car that is definitely one of my favourites. Retailing at 55,000 French francs at launch, the Twingo is Renault's cheapest offering in the range and replaced the Renault 4 as their cheapest car that they would offer brand new. But unlike the outgoing 4, it was modern motoring in a cheap and cheerful shell. The Twingo, named by Manfred Gotta, was the byword in economy and practical motoring for French citizens and Renault fans in the markets where the car was sold into, of course. The car was designed to be made as cheaply as possible, but they didn't do it like other people do nowadays by putting in poor quality fabrics or parts or wiring, and instead they did things like considering where the radio antenna was, and they put it on the side mirror to save on the length of cabling used. It was these little things that they did to really save the pennies. The car was as basic at entry price as you might hope for in 90s motoring. There was no airbag, no ABS, no central locking, no electric windows, no electric mirrors, no power steering, no aircon, and no automatic transmission option, which I do mention later on. But all of this, to be fair, does cut back on the potential to go wrong if you're trying to run one of these as your daily driver, so I'm sure many people were probably actually quite grateful for the simplicity. The low weight at 790 kilos, the pared back design inside and the lack of frills coupled with its size gave the car a low fuel consumption, and some components were borrowed from other cars like the Clio to ensure they weren't specialist and therefore kept the cost down even further. The low entry price point and the thrifty running and maintenance costs made the car a popular choice, and it was so popular that circa 2.4 million of these were sold into Renault markets where the Twingo was available. However, it wasn't all cutting costs and being meagre, because despite cost saving being vital, the car was designed with the end user in mind. For example, the car's wheels were pushed as far into each corner as they possibly could be to ensure the interior space was at maximum capacity. The windows were oversized, not to just ensure that visibility was enhanced, but to give the feeling of being light and airy within inside the car. The rear seats slid down and folded, and really that had never been a thing in cars of this size before, so they really set the trend for that. So when you see cars made after this where they're smaller, like little city cars, and they do that, it was the Renault Twingo which really marked that out, and therefore it became a small car with an awful lot of potential. And by the way, if you ever look at the advertising for this car in the early days, it's absolutely wild. And there's an advert floating around from the time which shows two men dressed as sumo wrestlers laid down in the car as though they're laid in a double bed, to show that potential of the car's seats being laid flat. Being a car which could easily fit in city life, Renault thought about how that would fit into life in Paris, and the car was designed with a turning circle of 9.7 metres, which gave drivers the ability to do a U-turn on a two-lane street in the busy capital. And it's just these little things which add up and make it a really attractive prospect. Now, one of the things that stands out for many in terms of these early Twingos is the colour. And in this generation, at this point in time, you had four colours. It was ultramarine blue, India yellow, which is sometimes called curry yellow, I believe, in German markets, coriander green and coral red. After launching in 1993, the car soon began to progress in terms of what it offered, and whilst the body shape might not have changed swiftly, even as early as 1994, new bits and pieces were being introduced. The Twingo Easy Transmission was introduced, so I think that's almost a bit of a auto situation. And then Renault Boutique, which were the arm of Renault that were offering the frills and extra bits that you might want to add to make your Twingo your very own, offered a package called Pack Electrique. Now this gave you the things that you might have been missing, things like electric windows, central locking, and I suppose if you lived in the south of France, you might have appreciated that this package also offered aircon, and it also offered ABS as well. But a vehicle's success isn't measured on all the frills and bits and pieces, it's measured on its sales figures, and by 1995, to say that they only started selling in 1993, 500,000 of these cars had been produced, which is quite a boom for the budget Renault Twingo. Now, whilst we never got them in the UK, there were a few dealers who shipped them across, so you might have seen them on forecourts if you have memories going back that far, and they were done as a bit of a press opportunity and to offer a bit of excitement for the dealership. Now you'll notice a dealership are mentioned on the plates on this particular car. Well, that's one of the dealers which did do this, ship a few Renault Twingos in at the time, although I don't believe it did sell this particular car. Now this is a very brief history of the Twingo, but should you wish to know more, the owner of this car, Chris, who runs the Instagram account even, called Twingo Talk, will be bringing out a book about the Twingo next year, and he's doing a bit of a soft launch and talking through some of this at the NEC Classic Motor Show next week, and that book will be diving into the deep, rich history of the Renault Twingo. I've heard about some of it going in, and it sounds like it's going to be a very interesting book. Now, with so many of these cars still about and parts still available for all your service items especially, if this is a car that takes your fancy, there has never been a better time than now to find a decent example to cherish. Well, I tell you what, this Twingo puts an absolute smile on my face, and I hope it does for you too, because whilst it might have been a cheap car, it's certainly a cheerful one, because we were talking about those four colours and everything being wonderfully colour coordinated. And one of the things that they really got right, and you see in so many 90s cars, are these rather jazzy seat covers. Now, you didn't have to pay extra for that, because we were talking about the Renault Twingo being the bottom of the Renault range and it being the budget value car in a way that I just don't think that you get with cars nowadays. And so you didn't pay extra for these seats because it was one car and one price, which we're going to come back to in just a minute. But there was something called Renault Boutique, which was where you could buy all your aftermarket extras and bits and pieces, and they also did a baby seat in this fabric, so you can see that here. And my goodness, I don't think that would meet safety requirements of today, but hey, at least it matched your brand new Renault Twingo. So as we come inside, you've got your rear window demist, you've got your fog lights. This panel here, let me see if I can show you it, so just pop the key on. You can see here, these are your warning lights. Coming in front of you is a lovely simple steering wheel. To your left hand side, you've got your horn. Oh, perky. I've just caught the attention of everybody around me, so must have enough authority. And then you've got your lights on that stalk as well. And on the right hand side, you've got your windscreen wipers. Now, this is something called, well, in France, they call it a monoblade. So that's how we're going to refer to it in this video. And you might be wondering how that looks on screen. Well, there you go, because Ian from Hubnut messaged me. We were talking about what we were reviewing this week, and he said, Steph, make sure you get that wiper footage because it is a good one. So there you go, Ian, that's just for you and all you wiper blade aficionados out there. Coming into the centre here, everything is just as wonderfully simple as the rest of the car, which I really like, because one of my big bugbears about modern cars, and I'm sure some of you at home can relate, is that do you not just think everything is overcomplicated for complication's sake? It's almost like showboating. Oh, look, we've done this now, we've done that now, and everything is so complicated in a way that we just don't need. Renault got this so right because it is so simple. If only cars were like this nowadays. Now, this little display up here, and it doesn't change too much in the later cars actually. You've got your kilometres per hour, you've got your little clock, and you've also got your fuel gauge there as well. Not too much fuel in this one, Chris, so won't be going too far on the test drive today. Now coming down from there, you've got your air vents, and I think the only two optional extras that you could buy were your fabric sunroof and your air conditioning, so that's worth mentioning. Everything else that you might have wanted was available through Renault Boutique. So those speakers that you saw earlier, Renault Boutique. This stereo down here, you've got it, Renault Boutique. But this is the thing, when you have these cars that are bottom of the range and the profit margins are so small, they do keep it cheap by keeping everything nice and simple. However, being a French car, we do have a cigar lighter because they do like their ciggies over there. And then we've got the ashtray there as well, the aforementioned stereo. And coming down here, you've got a little coin tray for your francs, so you can have that all ready. Because there's quite a lot of toll roads over there, so it made sense to have stuff like this because you were coming up to toll roads, you were putting money in. It was quite a regular occurrence. You've also, instead of having a glove box, because not only are you saving on cost because you're not producing that door, so that would have saved a few centimes, you are also reducing weight, because bear in mind this is a small car, you don't want to be bogging it down. And then that is pretty much everything, which makes the walkthrough in here quite simple. Now, we'll say one thing, we talk about one car for one price, and part of this one car for one price is that they didn't produce a right-hand drive because it would have cost too much to change production line. It would have added extra cost on, bitten into that profit margin that was already so small. And the other thing that they did as well was they only produced a manual transmission. You couldn't get automatic on this particular year. Now, I know that some people will jump in and say that automatics were available later on. Well, of course they were, because as they built up that profit bank, they were able to introduce newer things, which leads me quite nicely into talking about the engine as well, because I believe the engine in this, which is the 1.2, was a derivative of the Clio engine, which they'd used in the Renault 4. And so in this particular car, they'd wanted to use something more modern. The Twingo designers were so forward thinking, and they'd said, you know, want to create something, but the budget isn't there because it is bottom of the range. So they went with this, and even today, 30 years after launch, it still keeps up with traffic, because this isn't a car that is designed for going millions of miles. It's a car which is designed for going around town. Just an average person doing average things in their average little Twingo. It's not, you know, designed to be doing tens of millions of miles, although I tell you what, Chris racks some miles on, because he's come all the way from the south coast of England today all the way up to the north just for a visit to a friend, and he loves it, and he travels around so many miles in this car, so it's clearly capable of it. Now, I think that's all that we need to talk about. I'm going to get it started up for you so you can have a little listen. Probably check that it's not in gear. There we go. Now, it's relatively quiet inside. Have a little listen from the back as well. Do you know, this is one of the most delightful cars I've driven in ages, and I expected it, if I'm honest, to feel a bit tinny, but it feels remarkably well put together, because quite often you get in budget motors and they just feel a little bit lacking, and you forgive it because you think, well, it wasn't an expensive car at the time. But for me, this is just so nice. If you think about the quality of something like a K11 Micra or a Rover Metro, this far surpasses it. The plastics are sturdier, you get a more comfortable drive in terms of suspension. For me, the steering is lighter as well. It's, oh my goodness. I've got into this and I thought that I was going to feel like Maureen from driving school on day one, stalling all over the place and feeling a bit panicky, especially on the fact that I'm in a left-hand drive vehicle. But you know what? These lovely wide door mirrors, just everything gives you real driver confidence and comfort in a way that I really wasn't expecting to get today. I've been a passenger in a later one before, again another one of Chris's Twingos, and I really enjoyed that. And it's probably worth commenting actually on the roominess of this, because a very interesting fact about the Twingo is that it offers more room inside than the Clio, which was being sold at the same time. And the Renault team went to the Twingo design team and said, well, you can't put more room into the Twingo, which is the budget car, than the Clio, which is of course a more expensive car. And they said to them in that very blasé French way, well, it's your problem if you haven't made the Clio big enough for the customer. And they pushed on with the Twingo as it was, so they didn't compromise on the size, which means that despite it being budget and bottom of the range, you get a lot of room inside, which means that it's a lot more practical than you might think it is from the outside at first. Now, another surprise for you that you might not be expecting is that this has tinted glass all the way around, and that's, again, we talk about one car, one price. That's standard for the Twingo, and that's quite surprising for Renault at the time, because Renault at the time weren't offering tinted glass in all the cars as standard, and in fact there were cars higher up in the Renault family that weren't fitted with tinted glass. So again, another little delightful surprise for the little Twingo. And sometimes people look at videos like this and they say, well, what makes that a classic? What gives it credence? Well, first of all, for me, I think one of the reasons it should be considered a classic is because it got so many people on the road throughout the world. It was South America, Japan, France, of course, Central Europe. Because this was so cheap, it meant that many people were able to afford good quality, new, reliable motoring in a way that they'd just not really been able to afford before, in a car that was decidedly a lot more modern than the outgoing Renault 4, which was, I think, discontinued in 1992. Now, I thought that changing gear in this was going to be a little bit of a hassle, because changing gear with my right hand feels bizarre at the best of times. But you know what, as we come down, it all feels perfectly normal. It feels very natural and very rational. And the gear change as well is something I'd like to talk about, because some of the older cars that you test, even from the 80s, gear change can feel quite laboured. With this, not so. Lovely smooth gear change, and it's not a particularly low mileage example or anything like that. You know, it's not like it's a concourse one that we've taken out from Renault's legacy range or something like that. We have taken out a perfectly well-used Twingo and put it through its paces. And as well, it doesn't crunch and you're not having to do too much. Now, one of the most annoying things on today's test, apart from all the people that seem to be parked all over the road, are all these speed bumps. But the advantage of that is it has allowed us to test the suspension on this, and as you can see, it's taking it all very well in its stride. There's no clonks, there's no rattles, it's just getting on with the job. It's a real no-nonsense little car, and I can see exactly why Chris has fallen in love with these. I think they are smashing. I think the saddest thing is that we never got them in the UK, because I think this could have been a real competitor in the market. And in fact, it was such an impressive car for the time, and bear in mind, this came into a market where small cars weren't as popular as they were towards the end of the 90s. They're actually Ford, and they've said this in interviews, so it's not just hearsay. Ford designers have said that they looked at the Renault Twingo when they were designing the Ford car. And some people might know that's the KA, but it is officially called the Ford car. So as you can see, we talk about what makes a classic. Well, it brings affordable motoring, it influences other designs, it changes the game for Renault. It does so much. So for me, that makes it a car which is worthy of even the tag emerging classic. Now, I've really enjoyed driving this today. What would I change? I would prefer a right-hand drive, but that's just a preference thing. In terms of everything else, maybe a little bit more boot space, but you know what? If I wanted more space, you can fold the seats down into a bed, for goodness sakes. So there's plenty of room inside, so I can't really complain about that. So for budget motoring of the 90s, I think it really ticks every box. It's well made, you can still get all the parts, it's got a really great fan base out there, so if you've got any troubles, you can ask people the questions that you need to ask, and it comes in 4 delightful shades. What more could you ask for, really? Full marks from me. I really like it, and I only hope that more people begin to appreciate them. So that's it from me today. It'll be back to the workshop for me tomorrow, because It was one of our very last days to get Tina ready for the NEC Classic Car Show. So until next time, take care and drive safely.